Yes. Uh, I am a retired dentist, okay? But while I was doing my dentistry, I provided religious guidance for the Muslim community. First, I started in London, and then I branched across the country, and then the States, and then in the Caribbean. And I do visit many communities across the world, and I talk about Islam. I counsel people on Islamic issues, and that is why I'm here today. I have spoken to classes before that were with Ms. Gilmore, and we enjoyed the company. That's why I was asked again to speak to your class. Now, I don't like monologues, okay? Now, I could stand here and speak for a long time, but we don't have that time. So I'm going to ask you, what would you like me to talk about? Okay? Let's make it this way so that I will basically provide you with what's on your mind, knowing very well that to speak about Islam um, nowadays is like swimming in a very stormy weather in a wide open ocean. Okay, I realize that. But that doesn't mean that because things are going, against the current, that we cannot really try to bring things to, intellectuals in a way that will provide facts only. And I promise, because I've been, to the Vatican, I've been to synagogues, I've been to, I believe in interfaith dialogue. Therefore, I'm not going to claim that I'm going to give you facts and say, yes, sure, yeah, we heard many times before. What else will you tell us? You will claim that you are giving us facts. But I'm a person who respects all faith traditions. Uh, I'm not going to get into my own personal history of how I started enjoying learning about all kinds of faith traditions, but that was in my childhood, and then later on, I developed that into friendships with many, many people, and we started to talk about this. Let me emphasize, before you start telling me what you want me to say, that Islam does not stand out as a separate religion from Christianity or Judaism. Islam is not the name of a religion that was brought by Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a prophet and a messenger. Even though, now for communication's sake, we say yes, Islam is the name of the religion of the people who profess to be Muslims. So Islam is the religion, Muslims are the people who adhere to Islam. So just for communication's sake, to understand Islam, Muslim. Now, uh, in the Quran, which is the final revelation to humankind, um, there are 114 chapters. We call them surah. And in the longest one, which is number 2 in order, uh, it says the following, and I'll try to translate the meaning. It says, that is the book, that is the Quran. There's no doubt in it. There is guidance for people who believe in your message, that is Muhammad, and all the messages that came before you, and they are certain of the final day of judgment. Therefore, part of my faith is to believe in all the messages that came before Muhammad, peace be upon him. So I'm a firm believer in the message of Jesus, peace be upon him, Moses, peace be upon him, Abraham, Noah, Adam, and all the prophets and messengers in between. That's what Islam is all about. The word Islam literally means attainment, of inner peace through full submission to the will of God. See, you gave us an essay, and you said this is the meaning of Islam. Because, when you go and you want to bring the meaning from one language to another, you may have to expand. But this is exactly what it is: attainment of inner peace through full submission to the will of God. Tell me if there is a human being who can claim, well, there are people who don't believe in God. They'll tell you, don't tell me about God. But a Christian basically says, I want to attain, or I do attain inner peace through submission to the will of God. A Jew, there's no human being who says, nobody can control me. We are part of this universe, and we are subject to whatever happens within this universe, within the solar system, within planet Earth, within our environment. Something has to affect the way we are shaped, or our lives are shaped. So this is Islam, basically. And I submit to you that Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, never told his followers that I'm going to call you Jews. He didn't do that. Jesus, peace be upon him, never told his followers that I'm going to call you Christians. As a matter of fact, Jesus, peace be upon him, used to preach at the synagogue. Okay? There was no such thing as a church. Jesus, peace be upon him, never told the followers of Moses, forget about Moses now, it's my turn. I'm going to bring you something called Christianity. These are words that came later. And the same thing, it was Abraham who coined the description of Islam and was used in the final revelation as the name to describe our relationship with God. So we became called Muslim. But it is not just a name to separate us from the followers of Jesus or the followers of Moses. I wanted to mention this before I will ask you now to suggest areas where we can really talk about in regard to Islam. Okay? So, any suggestion? Yes.
Just I'm not sure it's particular to Islam, but the difference between Sunnis and Shias, is that related to Islam?
I will say that the tendency in every a group that subscribes or identifies with certain tradition is to separate with time into smaller groups and subgroups. The same as, you go to, in our days there used to be the yellow pages, okay, you go there and there are about 170 churches with denominations, and there's the Catholic, there's Protestant, there's the Anglican, there's the United, there's this. Does that mean that they don't believe in Jesus? The answer is no. But with time, they start to, have little deviations, so to speak, that will make them identify with the subgroup rather than with the group itself. So Sunnis and Shias, basically, it was a political issue that divided the followers of this leader from the followers of the other leader, and the bigger group, so to speak, is the Sunni. The smaller group is the Shia, and with time, differences became so deeply rooted that we started to talk about them when, I always say to people who say, can you tell, I say, I want to ask you, was Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a Sunni or a Shia? And they stop right away. Okay, he was neither. Okay, so now there are Sunnis and Shias, but they believe in the final message of Islam with differences, so to speak, but this is not really what we want to dwell on, the differences. We want to talk more about what brings us together. Yes?
Maybe like talk about fasting in countries where you have to fast for like 20 hours a day.
Okay, now leading to fasting, okay, the question you asked, I would like to say that there are 6 pillars of faith. To be a Muslim, I have to believe in 6 things. I have to believe in God without seeing Him. I have to believe in His angels. I have to believe in prophets and messengers. I have to believe in scriptures that were sent to the different messengers. I have to believe in the final day of judgment. We firmly believe that once we die, it's not the end. It's actually the beginning of a much longer journey that leads us to eternity in what we call, or after the day of judgment, where the same as when you graduate, you will be asked either an oral exam or a written exam or an open book or multiple choice or whatever. Okay, there is an account. You have to be held accountable for what you've studied or done, or so that time we spend on earth and all the injustices, all the killings, all the horrible things that are happening, and the good things that are happening, God who created us is going to judge us for what we've done at college earth. I always simulate our life as life, at college, university, okay? Why do you spend time and work hard or not so hard or nothing at all? It's your choice. But in the end, you have to be judged. And you know what? Sometimes you don't think much of it. You'll say, you know what? As long as I get that piece of paper that says, I have a BE, nobody's going to ask me whether I got 50 in structural engineering or 70 in math or this and that. Or nobody's going to ask me. But when you start to work, if you don't have solid foundation in a certain area, it will show. It will really show. And God wanted us to have certain ideals to live by, help each other, tell the truth to each other, have family bonds, have, so many ideals, okay? And if we really reject that, we have to pay a price, so to speak. Now, so number 6 is we believe in destiny. Call it fate, call it, that our life or whatever happens to us is predestined, okay? Everything that happens to us. Someone say, what do you mean, when I meet someone I like to spend the rest of my life with, what does God have to do with it? Anything with it. You see, we believe that God creates the circumstances that will make us make the choices, okay? Now, for example, we were told that your class will be meeting with me downstairs in this place, okay? You chose to sit on this chair. I didn't tell you to sit here, okay? But you can say that we were told that this is the place we can move in. You could put your chair here if you want. You could sit on that chair. So basically, we are free to move within a framework of destiny. Okay? So these are the 6 things: God, angels, prophets, scriptures, day of judgment, and destiny. Good or bad? We may think it's bad. God just made it happen to us. These are the 6 pillars of our faith. To put them into practice, there are 5 other pillars. The first pillar is basically to wrap the 6 pillars of faith. And this is basically to make a testimony that there's no deity to be worshipped but God, and Muhammad is the final messenger of God. This is the first pillar to put into practice. Number two, we have to offer 5 daily prayers, 5 times. Number three, we have to fast 1 month during a lunar month called Ramadan. Okay? Now, number four is to give 2.5% of our annual savings, okay, to the poor. And number five, we have to attend a mini day of judgment, so to speak, that we call pilgrimage. And where are we going to attend that? We were told, and we firmly believe, that the first house of worship for God was that cube that was built by Abraham, or rebuilt by Abraham and his son Ishmael in Mecca. So we congregate in Mecca once a year, okay? And there basically all people, irrespective of social status, political affiliation, understanding, no understanding, it doesn't matter. Everybody is the same, and we congregate there. It's a mini day of judgment we call pilgrimage, okay? So these are the 5 pillars. Now, you asked about fasting, because, you know, all acts of worship in Islam follow a lunar calendar, which is 11 days shorter than the Gregorian calendar. It means that every Gregorian calendar, our act of worship that is assigned to a certain time moves 11 days earlier. So the month of Ramadan rotates around the Gregorian calendar in 33 years. So when I used to fast, let's say, end of December, the year after that, it's 11 days earlier, and then into November, 11 days earlier, until I get to January, and then I go back into December. So 33 years, it goes all the way. So basically, when you say that in countries where it is long days, they would be fasting when the days are shorter. But how can people make it in, you see, next week I'm going to Fort McMurray. In Fort McMurray, sunset is at 10 to 11 at night. 10 to 11, okay? And dawn, which is about an hour before sunrise, is around 2:30 in the morning, okay? That is during summer days. In winter, it's just the opposite, okay? And there is allowance for people who live in such places that they will calculate, 15 hours as per people fasting in close to the equator, where the day and night are equal, and they can fast in a way that is suitable for their biological makeup. Okay, so it's not too bad. Any other question? I would like you to ask social questions, maybe about something. Yes.
The point of the fasting, is it a matter of identifying with those who don't have?
Part of it is yes. Part of it is personal, because it helps us identify with our biological health. Okay, we know for a fact. I'm a doctor. I know that toxins accumulate in fatty tissue, and when we fast, the first thing we start to lose is the fatty tissue, and so with that, the toxins start to dissolve, and we get rid of it. And so this is one part. The other part is psychologists say that if you do something consistently for more than 21 days, it becomes a custom, a habit. So when we, during the month of Ramadan, help the food bank, help the poor, gather with families, and with the month-long practice, because it's not only abstinence from food and drink. It is basically social. It is, thinking of others. Then this will really cleanse the inner self, the spiritual, before we will benefit from it physically. Okay, so fasting is an institution. Any other question? Yes.
This is a social question.
Yes.
I'm just wondering why women are required to cover their heads.
Okay. Now, it's not, I can say that God told us that men and women have to cover certain parts of the body. They have to. But humans, we know, and we've experienced it, they went all the way on the spectrum from nudist clubs, where there's absolutely nothing, to covering the entire body without even showing the eyes. And that is called the niqab or burqa. Okay, and we have to understand that, I was talking about this last Sunday, we have to understand that when we practice our religion, we cannot help but mix it with our culture. Okay, now there are cultures that took religion to a certain extreme as per other cultures, who will look at the culture and say this is extreme. Well, it is extreme to you being extreme to them, because cultures take things all the way. Okay, I tell you, if you will find a girl in the summer on Dundas and Richmond dressed in a halter top with shorts, and you will not think much of it. Okay, this is Canada. But I tell you, if the same girl would walk, let's say, on the streets of Cairo, or the streets of Istanbul, or the streets of Morocco, Casablanca, or it will not be looked at the same way. Now, here you will say, why do women have to cover their hair? Well, in other parts of the world, this is the norm. This is what is culturally acceptable as per religious description of what the clothing should be. So let me now take you from the culture to what Islam says about how to cover our bodies. Now, starting with the men, who traditionally are the people working in the fields and working to make a living, they have to cover from below the knees till above the navel. They cannot choose to wear skimpy shorts, or they can't. Okay, they have to cover what is called, what God assigned as private, because God is our creator. Now, in women, God said that women have to cover the entire body except the face and the hands. Now, that in Morocco can be done in a certain way, in Canada can be done in a certain way, but what is happening is that people who are migrating from countries where they are dressed in a certain way, they come here, and culturally there's a shock, because people who see what is culturally comfortable for them in their country, it creates a shock for them, and they say, why are they dressed like this? And they look at it and say, aren't you too hot? Aren't you too uncomfortable? But we have to be fair enough to say that we cannot judge people by their culture. Culture is very intimate. Okay, I cannot come to the girl who doesn't dress according to my understanding and say, how dare you? And that's her culture. I have to respect it. And I expect that when they see my culture, they would respect. Unfortunately, we are living in a world where people are very intolerant now of each other. We have seen people, and you hear the stories, who've snatched hijab from the heads of women who were standing at a superstore. They've done so many things, and there are people who walked into the synagogue, and now we can't really understand why would somebody go to worshipers and just gun them down, or go to the mosque in Quebec City and gun people down, or because people are or have become very intolerant of each other. We belong to the same species, yet, tell me, have you ever heard of a lion preying on another lion? Or any of the animal kingdom from the same species preying on each other? No. The only species that does that is Homo sapiens. It's us. Because we have gone out of whack. Okay, we are not following human principles, call it. Okay, so basically I say that for women, Islam says the following: there are 5 requirements, and then use those 5 requirements the way you want. Number 1, you have to cover these things that were mentioned, all except face and hands. Number 2, the clothing cannot be tight to show the shape of the body. Number 3, the clothing cannot be transparent to show what's underneath. Okay. Number 4, the clothing should not be extravagant. Oh, this dress is $10,000. And we know that there are some actresses and there are some wealthy people, they buy dresses for $100,000 just for one night. Islamically, this is unacceptable. And finally, number 5, it says women's clothing should not be like men's clothing, and men's clothing should not be like women's clothing. Okay, so you shouldn't, so this way, with all respect, but according to Islam, a man, this is the call for the third prayer of the day. So he just said, God is the ultimate supreme. God is the ultimate supreme. I bear witness that there's no deity to be worshipped but God. And he's repeating that. I bear witness there's no deity to be worshipped but God.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.
I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God.
حي على الصلاة.
Hasten, come quickly to pray.
حي على الصلاة.
Repeat it again. Come quickly to prayer.
حي على الفلاح.
Come quickly to achieve success.
حي على الفلاح.
Come quickly to achieve success.
الله أكبر الله.
God is the ultimate supreme. God is the ultimate supreme.
لا إله إلا الله.
There's no deity to be worshipped but God. So that is called the call to prayer. And this, now that they will
الله
pray,
الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا
what
إله
he's
إلا الله.
saying now is
أشهد
the
أن
quick
محمدا
version of the
رسول
call to prayer called
الله.
Iqama,
حي
where
على
now
الصلاة.
all the
حي على
people upstairs are
الفلاح.
going to line
قد
themselves
قامت
in a straight
الصلاة.
line
قد
and
قامت
face
الصلاة.
the direction
الله أكبر.
of prayer, which is the
الله أكبر.
Q Kaaba in Mecca.
لا إله
Okay.
إلا الله.
So that's the direction that they will be facing. Okay? So they will be praying upstairs. But because I should have been with them, but I can't pray. I have till sunset, to pray this prayer. Okay, even though they just are
Allahu
praying.
Akbar.
Okay. So so these are the requirements. I was saying that men's clothing should not imitate women's, and women should not imitate men. For example, without any offense to anybody, a man cannot put an earring. Okay, this is women's. Cannot have certain piercings. Cannot have. This is basically because of this fifth rule of clothing. Okay. Any other question before time is running? You know, this is your chance. Yes.
Not really social question.
Any question? It's okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So as we put in our efforts to have this submission to God, does God make allowance for our weakness and our inability to follow everything?
Beautiful question. Does God make any allowance for our weaknesses, our shortcomings, our inability to abide by the rules that are laid? You know, this is through what I said, submission to the will of God. My answer is absolutely. Actually, the thing that we can be assured of is that God, among his 99 attributes, is the oft forgiving. The oft forgiving. It's one of his 99 attributes. Another attribute is the most merciful. Another attribute is the compassionate. Another attribute is the loving. Okay? So these are attributes of God. And God told us humans were created with a weakness. As we read in the Quran, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, meaning that humans, God created us with weaknesses, and he will take that into consideration. Mind you, at school, okay, when Ms. Gilmore has to submit, you know, the marks at the end of the course, you are not going to say, well, you know, this person has a certain weakness, I'm going to give it. No, it's what you do in the evaluation process. Either you get an A or a C. Okay, but God does not work according to human standard of evaluation. He has his own standard that is divine. Okay. You had another question?
I was going to ask, what would you say defines women's clothing versus men's clothing?
To what?
What would define men's clothing versus women's clothing?
Okay, it's just basically those 5 requirements for women, okay, that they should satisfy those 5 requirements. For men, they have to, you know, cover from, and in certain cultures, they cover like this, okay. In Saudi Arabia, for example, they have a long robe, and you'll ask me, why do they have this robe? Because of the climate, you know, and because the climate dictated that they allow air to be the insulator. So it provides coolness in the summer, and it provides warmth during the winter, okay, in those very severe desert climates. You know, in the winter, it's very cold. Okay? In the summer, it's very hot. So basically, there are those requirements, and then you take the climate into consideration and you mix them together. Yes.
So when you were talking about the standards again, like how it's like a divine standard that's set by God, I was wondering, in Islam, is there like a form of assurance, I guess, that that you have been, I guess, like accepted by God, or in the judgment time that
Are there any? I didn't understand. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, like a form of assurance of like of knowing that.
Okay, actually, my answer to the, you know, many of the Muslim congregants ask me the question, and I tell them, you know, because I also taught for 10 years at Western, okay, I was a professor there, and I always told my students what I tell everyone else: do your work to the best of your ability, and don't worry about evaluation. That's what I tell them. Now, to live and say, I need an assurance. Am I going to have salvation? Am I going to be, you will be paranoid. And humans cannot survive with paranoia. Okay? We've got to just be comfortable and relaxed by doing our very best and leave the rest to the merciful, compassionate, forgiving, loving, all those assurances actually, okay, tell me that I'm gonna be fine. And one thing that I know for a fact, God did not create me to torture me. Is that enough? He didn't. Okay, even though we are told that there is the garden called Jannah and there is the hellfire. And I'll tell you, the hellfire, many of the scholars gave different descriptions of. Now, if somebody fails a course and it's the last course to graduate, and you have an intercession, or you have a summer school, or how painful is it to lose the fun of your summer by taking a remedial course? It's painful, okay, because you have to graduate. The same thing before getting to the garden, to what we call paradise, to the Jannah, okay, and you didn't do that well during your life on earth, you've got to spend time at what we call the hellfire to be purified from that which by choice you accumulated. It's like having gold ore. You know the ore? Okay? You've got to heat it in order to separate the pure gold from impurities. Okay? We cannot go to eternity having the slightest impurity. Impurity is the tendency to hurt others, the tendency to tell lies, the tendency to do this, the tendency. So that has to be, and that has to be done by what we call punishment. Okay, now we look at punishment through negative lenses, when punishment is something positive actually. As my daughters and my son were growing, and they just basically they do many things sometimes because they just feel like doing them, and then mom comes and says, don't do it again. Do you think that mom or dad enjoy doing that? But without doing that, okay, without punishment, and sometimes punishment is by withdrawing privileges. Quite often, things happen to us. We don't understand why, and maybe I'll ask the question because I'm sure that you will be interested. Many people say, if God is so merciful, why all the epidemics and all the disease and all the poverty and all the slums of the world and all, okay? And I answer this by saying that God created us in a communal structure. We cannot survive as individuals alone. We've got to live inside communities. And some communities have to learn about other communities, and we interact. And God says in the final revelation, okay, had God not made you to interact with one another, to see different states of affairs, we call it وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ, had you not been exposed to different states of disease and health, poverty and richness, health and sickness, imprisonment and freedom, you name it, opposites. Had you not experienced those opposites, even by hearing about them, you will not appreciate the elements of this earth you are living in a transient fashion. Let me tell you something. I was born in Lebanon. I came, and proudly so, from a very poor family. I never enjoyed riding a bicycle until I was 17 years of age. And it wasn't a bicycle like the one that now my son, says, Dad, I want this kind now. And now I want this car, and I want this, and I want that, okay? And I'm giving. When I was back in Lebanon, okay, I tell you, if there is a happiness meter to see how happy I was, even living in poverty. And by the way, I used to walk 5 kilometers to the highway by the airport in Beirut, Lebanon, to study under the street light, because we were 11 people living in 2 rooms that were no bigger than, I would say, from here till there, that's 11 people living in that space, including facilities, okay? And I used to go to study, and I went into medical school, and then I, continued, and I went into dentistry later when I came to Canada, and, I tell you, if I will take now my son and throw him into that environment now, he'll be miserable. But I was happy. And there are people who are born with a genetic disease, okay? And you've seen those images, people who are born blind. There are people without limbs, and they are happy. They are, there is one segment on YouTube, a person who didn't have any, and he was giving a lecture basically. I don't know if you saw that, and telling people how you should be happy, how to make the best use of what you have. Believe me, there are, miserable situations by our standard, and it's not that God did not care about them, but God willed to create all of that so that we can interact with one another for what is historically a nanosecond. Because once we pass to what is real life into eternity, where there's absolutely no deformities like we experience on this earth, we will be, everybody, enjoying the fruits of what they've done with what God gave them. So if God, you told me about weaknesses, and okay, if God created a certain strength in someone and another weakness, do you think God will judge them, for the outcome of what they've done? No. It's what they were able to do. If somebody is really strong and was able to achieve much more than someone who's weak, okay, the weak person is not to be punished for his weakness or her weakness. So therefore, this life is very short compared to eternity. And all of this that we call suffering now, when we go to the other side of the spectrum, we will not even really pay attention to what we went through. It will be, it's like, I tell you, I forgot when I graduated, okay? It's been a long time ago. While I was at school, I didn't like the long assignments, and I didn't like the, sleepless nights at the lab. I didn't like, the clinic hours that were so extended. I didn't like that. But now I look at it and I say, it's gone. I'm enjoying, okay? And now I spent 33 years practicing, my dentistry, and now I retired. I'm enjoying my retirement. So the long hours I worked at my clinic, it's fine. I'm not going to say, no. So there is wisdom behind all of that, but believe me, you will not be able to appreciate that wisdom until you go on the other side. Any other question? Yes.
In Christianity, to be joined by the church and we're all children of God,
Yes.
there's a baptism
Yes.
with water.
Yes.
Is there a
Something
ceremony
similar.
to come?
Is there?
Yeah, is there a ceremony or something equivalent?
Okay. Now, by the way, I want to comment on the concept of children of God. Now, in the Quran, we read that all of us are children of God in as far as a father loves his children. So it is not to be considered literally. And I tell you, I'm a student of the Bible. I studied all 66 books of the Bible, whether the Old Testament or the New Testament, and I know that if you compare the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Matthew, you will find big differences between Matthew and John, in that Matthew looks at the symbolic meaning of fatherhood, okay, whereas John insists on the physical sonship, okay, of God and the Son. But we believe that it is symbolic, okay, and baptism, again, in theology, there's only one difference between Christianity and Islam, between Christian theology and Islamic theology. One difference only, and that is the original sin. Okay, the original sin, according to Christian theology, Adam sinned by eating from the forbidden tree, and we started to inherit his sin, and God sent Jesus, peace be upon him, to deliver us from that original sin. Whereas in Islam, we believe that the sin of Adam was forgiven by God, and that sin cannot be inherited. We are born sinless, and we choose to commit sin or not to sin, okay? And because of this, we do not believe that baptism, to basically wash us symbolically as John the Baptist did with Jesus, okay, that we really need to be baptized. But nevertheless, we have something similar. Before we perform any of the 5 daily prayers, we have to do what is called ablution, okay? And that is to wash certain parts of the body with water, because we believe that what God told us in a chapter called Prophets, he mentioned to us that he created us mostly out of water. Okay, وَخَلَقْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ, meaning we created all living things out of water. And we know that 76% of us is water, H2O, okay? Therefore, when we really bring water into our life, basically it is a reminder that we are made of that pure thing, which is water. And we do that all the time, albeit for a different reason, but it is similar to what baptism is all about. And I bring again the fact that this is where the point of departure in Islamic and Christian theology is. Okay? Any other question? First question is free. The second one you have to pay. You want to set the odds? We'll make it free. We'll make it free. Okay.
I just wanted to clarify a few things first. You mentioned the gold and being refined by the heat, and how in order to be in the garden in the afterlife, we need to be without blemish and perfect. And you mentioned how if there is that blemish, we will go through the punishment in order to be purified. At what point can you not be purified if someone who's lived a bad life comes and goes through the punishment?
Yes, the questions are an essay.
I tell you something. I don't know. The question that he asks is very subtle. At what point it becomes hopeless to clean blemishes? At what point God decides that someone has stepped the boundaries? At what? I believe there's nothing impossible for God. But how is it done? I don't know. Okay, there are certain things that I know students have to leave to their professors. You know, a professor is a professor is a professor because she has gone through the training. He has gone through the training. Now, our Creator knows what we don't know. And God actually says in the Quran that you may dislike something in which God had put lots of goodness for you in it. And you may like something which is very bad for you. Okay? God knows, and you don't. That's what God is telling us. So sometimes we look at the surface and we find that why? Okay, we ask why. We have the right to ask, okay? But we may not find the answer. And we have to be humble enough to say, well, we will find out one day. Any other question? We have still 3 minutes before you will, I don't know where, you know, the executive director, Arish, he must be coming. What time did he say he would come?
Yeah, we'll meet him upstairs.
Oh, you'll meet him upstairs,
Yeah.
okay. So if you have another question, anything that's on your mind, please don't say this is, you know, I can't ask this question, what will they say about me? No, I don't judge anybody. Yes.
Recently, I believe in Saudi Arabia, women are now allowed to drive.
Now they're allowed.
Now they're allowed to
Yeah,
drive.
yeah.
So I'm just wondering why previously they weren't allowed to.
You tell me. I mentioned something about 20 minutes ago that could answer you. Tell me to see if you were listening to me.
Well, I know it's the culture and stuff, but
Don't but
Don't
or
but,
anything.
okay.
I said it's very difficult to separate culture from, you know, there are certain things lately that my children ask me, you know, Dad, why are they chopping people's heads? Okay? I said there are people, first of all, there are criminals who can claim anything they want, okay? But there are people who are doing certain things not because of Islam, but in spite of Islam, despite Islam, they are doing it, okay? And there are people who say, wow, this is my chance to now dramatize it and say, look what Islam, you know, like now, okay, there are, you know, people are talking about Muslim rape gangs in Europe, okay? And there are people who call me and they said, you know, is it because Muhammad made them do it? and I train myself not to get angry. I can be asked any question I want. But how could we believe that a religion, a way of life, would condone rape? Okay. Now there are rules that actually organize relationships of a husband and wife, even. So there are people who can do anything, and they can put Muslims the same as ISIS, put Islamic whatever. I'm glad I forgot what it stands for now. I don't want to remember. But they put Islamic, and there are people who said, yeah, see what, but unfortunately, a phase we went through where all those horrible things happened. But am I going to judge an entire way of life, an entire faith tradition because of something like this? People can say anything they want. Anything else? Okay, I know that there are so many things that we could talk about, but you didn't come to take a whole course about Islam. You just basically wanted to get familiar with a few things. I want to thank you for coming, and hopefully